So what we're going to do is we're going to talk through these 3 incidents that occurred. We'll kind of go in chronological order and just kind of talk about what was going on during that time, the event kind of leading up to the actual slides, and kind of what our takeaways were individually, and just kind of let that conversation go organically. Again, we've always wanted to be part of our community, our conversation, because there's no way we can learn from these incidents. We don't talk about them. So this is meant to be a very healthy conversation, to just be a part of our continuing effort to learn from each other. So we are going to start with Kat. Hers, what's the date of your? January 5th. Wow. So yeah, I'm gonna pass it off to her and we'll go from there.
So I went out with 7 friends, well, 6 friends and myself, and we felt like we did a lot of good things. We went for coffee the morning before, talked about areas we wanted to go. We had an interesting situation. We had one guy who was not a skier, he was an ice climber. So we're trying to figure out areas to go that there could be ice climbing as well, and decided on Scuba. So we all drive out there that morning. It was very icy on the trail. It was probably in the low 20s, I guess. Had a great time hiking up, got to the basin, and we all kind of chatted about what our plans were going to be. We had our ice climber, we had a group that was going to stay lower, and a group that was going to head up towards the, I don't know my directions in there, I'll go to the right. So we kind of took off, talked a little bit about where our ultimate plan was to go to check out that little lake. I'd never been there. It was pretty cloud covered, couldn't really see it from down low. So we all just started heading up that right hand side of the pond. It was pretty icy in some spots, powder in some spots. And we had one guy with us who was younger, like 17 years old, really strong. So we let him go ahead. And myself and my other friends we were pretty vocal about what we wanted to do. Talking about like what to watch out for. And just one of my friends was very good about being vocal about this. And as we're going up, we kind of looked over, we saw our cliffs and everything, and made our way up. And we had, I think in that picture right there, you can see on the photo that's up there, the 2 skiers, so the 17-year-old is the front, and then my friends, and then I'm in the back there. We came up around that cliff area and made our turn to the right. And the part that plays back in my head all the time is there's a little hill from where I am to the second person. So I wasn't really paying too much attention to what was going on too far ahead of me. But in my mind, I thought, well, that's where that circle is. That's where you're going to switch back and head back up to the left. And so I was just a little bit farther back, probably a little bit too much farther to here. And our first skier in that photo went up to the area where the circle is, and there's a little nose. So probably wind loaded, definitely was wind loaded. Went up there and I stomped on it a good 7 or 8 times, and before I could say anything, I saw the crack kind of start going all the way up and around. And I've seen avalanches in Himalayas before. I've never seen one in this area. I was amazed at how slow it was. Like it barely moved. It was like quicksand slowly going down. And the guy in the front said that something hit his foot and knocked him off balance. So he went down. And the whole time I'm watching this happen, my friend's in front of me, and I yelled to the second guy, get back, get back. And next thing I know, he was down as well. And like the next thought in my head was, well, there's a cliff right underneath us. So where that circle is, they slid down over to there. One of the cool takeaways, the second guy was able to swim his way over, so he didn't go off the cliff proper, whereas the first guy did go off the cliff proper. But watching your friends going off a cliff is gotta be the most surreal thing. I knew it wasn't going to be anything too, like I felt like there was no threat of death because there was not that much snow. There was about a foot of snow that was moving, 12 to 60 inches. So I knew that wasn't a problem, but I was worried about legs getting twisted on the cliff area. So I watched them, and I knew the people across from us, hopefully they were watching too, which I guess from this photo, they saw it. I just sat there and waited and yelled, and I finally saw one friend get up, I saw the other friend get up, and they started moving around, and I knew everything was semi-okay. But I don't know, it went down, I don't remember what the number was, 100 some feet they had gone down. So it was a really interesting experience. I threw on my skin, or took my skins off, skied down to them right away, kind of make sure everyone was okay. Another person from the other group started skiing over to make sure what happens, but we had lost 2 pairs of skis, or well, 2 skis, 2 poles. Somehow we found them all. We found all the poles and skis after about a half hour looking. But I guess my takeaway would be that there were a lot of interesting feelings involved in this situation, and I'm a girl, so I have lots of feelings, and maybe guys process feelings a little differently. And I think that having a debrief that night and probably the next morning would have been a good idea. I'm very open. I'll talk about anything. I don't care. So I was very vocal about the situation. I sent in the Abby report that night. And I guess I wish we would have talked more about it after everything happens. But you can see, like, from the bottom of this photo, that's where it's about where the runoff hit. And the guy went back up to kind of look for the skis. The cliff on the right, to the right of the skier, is kind of where he went off. Maybe a good 12 feet. So, yeah, 15 feet. And then the other guy came off a little bit to the left. He was able to swim over, which I thought that was cool, that he actually was able to maneuver his way across. But hard pack. Our worry, like, and I don't know any better, was that once all hard there, more of it has slid up above. You can see up above where the cliff is. Like, would that have been a possibility that could come down too? There's a flat spot just above where our aim was to go, because our aim was to go where those dark tree lines are, above the cliff, and then head to the right, and that's where the lakes were. One of our guys was very worried that would have come down too, so we're being really careful. And then when we realized it was pretty, started looking for rescue. Yeah, very surreal. I didn't know that an avalanche would be that, and even being that slow and not that much snow would still wipe out. Well, we have that much of a capacity. No idea. But I've lived in the valley for 23 years. I've never seen an avalanche. That was my first one.
I'm a processor too. I like talking about it. But I think that's a very valid and important takeaways to be able to discuss afterwards, talk about it.
Again, like, feel free to shoot them out there. We'll do a better job.
The other thing to add, you'll notice in each of these, we put in the date, the range, and then just some basic weather in the event, just to give you some context. And then what the bed surface, or, and these ones just as a faceted cross, that was the weak layer bed surface for this avalanche and another one. But those ones that are in the stars at the bottom.
Oh, February 5th, not January 5th. I went back way too far. Sorry. Well, it didn't update, so we're going to years.
So this was a slide that occurred in the Apgar Range on Fern Creek, January 19th. I was skiing. We were a group of 5, and those of you that have been Fern Creek know that it's quite the slog to get in there. So after a couple of hours, we finally reached the ridge. We had talked about what we wanted to ski. There was discussion of that we assumed kind of that main run kind of from the top of the ridge would possibly be a little more wind affected. And there was kind of a couple of my ski partners had skied, I think the week before, maybe 10 days before, just a little bit lower down on the ridge, a tree run that we assumed would be a little more protected. When we reached the top of that tree run, we kind of looked at it and we're like, yeah, this looks great. And we decided though that we wanted to up the ridge. We had plans to dig a snow pit and just kind of make sure that we wanted to know what was going on. So we continued up probably another few hundred feet in elevation. Reached about, I think it was about 5,800 feet, and that's where we decided to dig a snow pit on a east-northeast facing aspect. And didn't have, I think we had ECTN 14 at like, can't remember how many centimeters down off the top of my head, but nothing that was really alarming. We then continued up another maybe 100 feet, and members of the group started kind of ripping skins, and I think the conversation never quite happened. Like, are we skiing this slope, or are we going to continue back down the ridge and ski that tree run? And we all kind of looked at it, and we just kind of, there was this like, well, this looks good. We're here. Like, let's just ski it. And this was an area that myself and two of my ski partners had skied together quite a few times. And then two others that had not skied it. So we kind of put them in the middle. We did have radios on. And after the first member of our group skied down, he radioed back and said, it definitely feels a little slabby right in the middle. So ski a little more skiers right. Fast forward, everyone else kind of skis down. Again, we had radio communication, and I was the last ski down the slope, which is about a 30-degree slope. And, you know, it's been interesting how many people have mentioned to me in discussing this, like, wow, like Fern Creek is definitely kind of that zone you go to when you want to just still have some fun skiing, but stay on like mellow slopes. And I think this kind of proves that really maybe doesn't matter as much. So anyway, I started skiing down, and as I was skiing, I realized that my group was much farther to my right than I assumed they were stopping, because we could not see where the group had stopped. So in my effort to join them, I made a fairly sharp turn to my right. And as I was talking to one of my friends just the other day about it, she was kind of like, well, yeah, you weren't making decisions in that moment. You were just skiing. And that's kind of where this whole conversation of like decision making and skiing and avalanche terrain, you know, we're trying to learn more about it, but sometimes like in the moment, like we are just skiing. And so I made a fairly turn to my right. It happened to be right on like a little bit of a rollover, which in my guess went from maybe a 32 to a 30 or 30 to a 32-degree slope. And that's where the slide triggered. And at that point, you know, I knew that the snow was underneath my feet. I wouldn't say it fully knocked my feet. I was kind of almost sitting on the snow surface. And in my mind, I was just myself to stay upright because I didn't want to start to tumble. And I was sliding down. And again, I didn't feel like it was moving fast. At that point, I knew that my entire group could see me. So I definitely felt that in my head, like, okay, I know they have eyes on me. And I looked ahead and I knew I was coming towards, you can see in this photo, like where most of that debris pile is, like it was starting to go into these trees and smaller trees to that measure. I think the next slide, I think it shows it maybe from the other, nope. Oh, okay, that's fine. And I looked ahead and kind of thought to myself, actually, I had recently taught an awareness class like a few days before. And I remember one of the things that someone in their videos, in the Know Before You Go videos, talks about is that they triggered a slide at one point and they grabbed onto a tree. And if they hadn't grabbed onto the tree, they would have continued down much further. And so that was in my mind. I saw these trees ahead of me. And I knew that maybe I would get hurt, but I wanted to stop myself. I didn't want to, in that debris pile. So I grabbed onto a tree and it did stop me. And then my next thought was, I really hope there's not a lot more snow coming up behind me. And I could feel it kind of like hitting me. But it stopped just a few seconds after I had grabbed the tree. And I was able to move, the one arm I had grabbed the tree with my one arm, and the other arm, I did have snow around my face. I never felt like I was fully buried, but I was able to move all of that snow away from my face. And I was also able to reach my radio on my backpack. One of the ski partners radioed right away and asked if I was okay. And I said, yes, I'm okay. But I couldn't move. I was pinned up against the tree and my legs were fully buried under the snow. So they got their gear on pretty quickly and got to me within a couple minutes. And the only thing, I was in an uncomfortable position, but other than that, I wasn't injured. And so after I kind of was able to get out of the snow and stand up, we all kind of sat there and, kind of with stunned faces, just kind of looked at each other and was like, holy shit, that just happened. We took some pictures, and at that point we knew we had a long kind of slog out, and think in my own head, I just really wanted to kind of get out of there. So we didn't spend a whole lot of time going back up to the crown and checking things out. In hindsight, I kind of wish I had, because I now have more questions. But again, I think at the time I just kind of wanted to get home. So, one of the questions I was asked was, based on those snow pit profiles, or the snow pit that we dug, like what kind of evidence did that give us to ski the slope? And granted, we did go up another 100 feet. And so it was still the same aspect, but I think there was a little more of that wind effect where we were. But the snow pit, we were expecting more results of some sort of wind slab, and we didn't see them. So for that sense, I feel like it did give us this sense that it was going to be okay to ski. I think there was a conversation that never happened after we ripped skins, that it kind of was a very mellow, like, oh yeah, this looks good, we can ski this, we've skied this before. And it should have gauged into more of a conversation of, well, I thought we were going to go ski that other slope down the ridge, and that never came back up. So I thought a lot about that as well. We did some debriefing after I kind of stood up. My friend identified, they were like, you're kind of shaking right now, maybe you should sit down. And so I did sit down, and we talked a little bit about it, and then the next day had some more conversations. Kind of been thinking a lot about it since. So again, these are all opportunities to hopefully continue to learn from each other. And I've taught a couple intro classes since then, and I've brought it up. I've showed these slides, and we've had conversations about them. And so, again, making sure that it does turn into more of a learning experience for myself and for others. So.
And do you have a plan that y'all talk about, a plan to ski that slope before walking up there, like on the way? Was it like, or was it to ski the ridge back down? Or was it just kind of open-ended?
It was a little open-ended, but I think from the start, we had thought that it might just be too wind affected. And then when we got up there, we weren't, I think we did like one little turn that felt pretty good. Felt soft, it felt nice, good snow. And it was, well, it wasn't. And that very same day, Cam was also out.
The only thing I just thinking, like, these ones, as far as forecasting, really triggered a few thoughts in my mind, and kind of start with Kat's, is that, we had these weak layers in the snowpack, these faceted crusts, and
if you remember, like February or January and beginning of February were pretty dry. And so we were getting these like little weather events, just like a few inches here, a few inches there. Meanwhile, the swan was getting dumped on. But it it really took a while for these weak layers to get loaded with enough snow to be a problem. One thing I kind of mentioned to Kat's like hers was the first one that shifted my brain in the flathead range because we've been having this faceted crust forever. And it was like first trigger, the first, reported avalanche on it. It was like, okay, this is now a different ball game in the flathead range. So yeah.
We've got a couple of questions. You think it was the hardness of the turn that triggered the slide or just the location of the turn? I think it was the combination of both. Again, I made a sharp turn, one that I normally would not make, in order to meet up with my skier group. And then it just, it was like this perfect storm, this perfect combination of things. Again, I made this a sharp turn. I made it right on rollover. And I think there was some wind effect there. So I really do think it was a combination of all of those things. And then any other traps through that spot? No, everyone else seemed to kind of skiers left of it, and they didn't make their way over to the right till they were below it. And so I kind of took a couple turns and I looked over and saw them, and that's when that sharp turn. So no one else had hit that spot. So which is, that was also kind of the weird thing that I was the fifth skier down the slope and I triggered the slide. So.
Next rollovers.
Yeah.
Both of them.
You see that?
Okay.
There we go. Okay, so on the same day, in fact, my birthday, I went to the Swan Range with Eric Peich, a former director, and it was it was storm day there for sure. The avalanche danger that day was considerable. It was that, if you remember the storm where we were supposed to get, or forecast for showing 15 inches for like every 12-hour period that we're getting skunked at, but the Swan was picking it up. So we saw 15 inches of new snow on the ground. And during the day, a lot of that precipitation was going to come at night, but during the day, we were surprised by the precipitation rates during the day. It was dumping snow. We got up to, this was in Spider Bowl area, so the west side of the Swan. We got up to the Swan Crest, and it was just howling winds. And we didn't really talk about it, but we went there and never even discussed the terrain we were going to ski, because it was so obvious to not ski down into like North Wildcat Lake or anything like that. So it was like going out to ski wind sheltered slopes. Something that was interesting about this is 3 days prior, it was cold and clear. So we talked about it on the way up. It was like, we dug a snow pit. We're like, a couple of days ago was a prime day for surface hoar to form. So we were kind of thinking about a recently buried weak layer. And then right after that, we got some snow and strong winds. And with that wind event formed some stiffer, in the forecast, we're talking about these old hard slabs. So snowing a lot. We took one lap and we had a conversation at the bottom, and I was working, and we were talking about, we were getting a lot of loose, dry avalanches and steeper terrain. And we were talking about how it's like on the verge of maybe being a storm slab problem. So we were like, well, let's go back up and dump. So let's just like go back up and see how conditions are changing throughout the day. So, it's one of the benefits of the job is sometimes you're not just skiing, you know, crusts and bad snow. It's like storming and you need conditions. So we went back up. We skied down, and we were actually going to ski further down the ridge and take it slower. Extra so then put it over. So we were literally just down the ridge, and we were kind of just really small. We talked about we didn't really talk about the one like long path that was available to ski on the aspects we were skiing. We both wrote that off immediately because it was getting wind affected. So yeah, we're sticking to our southern terrain. So we worked down this ridge, and we just made the decision we weren't really gonna off the ridge yet, that we were just gonna space out and ski down. So we were spacing out, skied down mellow terrain, and I kind of just popped over on the you see on this left side of the screen here, this short, steep little short pitch and triggered this little loose ride that went down and propagated. So I went to the edge of the slope, and it was sitting there watching the snow, really benign avalanches go down the slope, and saw it propagate. So I was kind of interested by it. And Eric, he was behind me, and he kind of came rolling over, came over this breakover. Oh, sorry. Thank you. He came over this breakover, and I hear him behind me, and he says, "Ooh, a crack." And it kind of, I didn't know if it was something that I had triggered in my ski, or if it's, or if maybe something that he had triggered. However, all of a sudden, there was another person actually skinning up the ridge, looking at me. We're actually right when I started talking to her, all of a sudden my feet swept out from under me, and I started moving down the hill, and I was right on the edge of this steep section. So I couldn't see what was behind me, and I knew that we had that buried surface ore that was deep in the snowpack, and we were talking about it, and it was unlikely to trigger at that time, but for a split second in my brain, I was like, oh no, like if it's that, then maybe I'm going to go further than I anticipate, or even if it's small, like, so I had a split second of that in my head, but then I also thought, like, Eric sounded like he was talking to a puppy. And so so those are two immediate thoughts I had in my head. My arm was right there, and so I pulled my airbag because it was available, it was right at the beginning. So I was like, I got this thing. I'm gonna carry the extra weight around, I'm gonna pull it. And maybe if I go over this little bench here, I may not get to be able to pull it because I might be getting tangled up a little bit more. So I pulled the airbag, and it was funny, like there was that tree that you see right behind me there. This is like a pretty good sized bench. And so I kind of had that in my mind. It's like, all right, I'm pretty sure I'm not going over this thing. And by the time the airbag even fully inflated, I was just stopped right in front of this tree. But something I couldn't see the depth of it. I couldn't really see what was going on, and I was just kind of going down that slope. Something that was kind of interesting when you know, right during the event, or I didn't think about it until after the fact. Like the next day, I was like, why did this, you know, 8 or 10-inch soft slab kick me off my feet, and I wasn't able to claw on the bed surface and stop myself? Because it was like not a big or hard avalanche, but you know, in the crown on the right side, you can see that layer at the bottom, and there was this harder layer of windboard at the top. And then further down, if you look at the picture on the left, there's some bigger blocks. And I remember right there, I took my backpack off, and I kept on having to like chuck it over these little blocks. So to kind of relay that story, so we had, you know, 10 to 15 inches of new snow with some wind. But what failed was that a layer of surface ore that we found that was underneath that old, harder wind drift. And so I was just further down the slope. I think I was just standing on maybe a spot that was maybe a foot thick, and which is why I couldn't reach through the bed surface and stop myself. So, you know, that was the kind of the scenario there. it was funny, like right after Eric had, he had the view of the whole thing because he was right behind me. And immediately when I stopped, he was laughing because he knew I wasn't going any further. And he made the comment, he's like, I got you a birthday present. And so we were kind of laughing afterwards. One of the kind of the takeaways for me was one, I triggered this small loose dry. I kind of came across and there was the person skinning up the slope. So I ended up stopping still on the edge of this little start zone. So I was stopped on a steeper piece of terrain, kind of distracted by two different things. And I was just kind of standing there hanging out. And in hindsight, if this didn't happen, I would never even thought about it because it was pretty benign terrain. But, we ended up having two people in a steeper piece of terrain. And, I got caught in a little slide. So obviously one is, be more diligent about even in small terrain of just how many people you put on that kind of terrain. Two was one kind of the positive things that Eric and I talked about is like, we were very specific in the terrain that we were selected that day based on the changing conditions and the amount of snow and wind. So one of the comments we made is just like, man, there's this steeper run that we call the tube that's to the right of all this. And it's like, if that thing happened there, if this happened there, it would have been a different story. And so it kind of comes down, it's like when conditions are changing, it's like, that's why we make our terrain simpler. So, for us, this was like, got knocked off the feet, but in hindsight, like totally, well, really fine, but given the terrain, we just weren't in the terrain that was really capable of producing the avalanche. So yeah, that's kind of the two takeaways is regardless, one person steep slope terrain and select terrain that's right for the day.
There was a question, do we think that the dry and kind of stone spell that we've been experiencing played a role in these slides? Or just like there was a little bit of fresh snow and wanting to get out there and I think yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a reason we're all out there, right? Backcountry skiers and recreationists want to be out there in the fresh snow. And even when making those choices as far as terrain and making good choices, things can still go wrong. And so I think that's also been another takeaway for me. Like can't make all the right choices as much as, and of course, like one of my first thoughts was like, I'm an educator. I teach this. I'm not supposed to make these mistakes. And, but again, it comes back to about it, I think, is how we learn from mistakes. Again, it's almost like, I'm not going to say there was a huge mistake made. It was just like perfect storm of things that happened in my situation. And yeah, it just kind of sounds kind of wonky in your guys' too. So it's just, there's always more to learn and there's always more conversation to be had.
Is there like a maybe nice spell
Because that was
so maybe like
had like there's probably a good 4 inches of snow, maybe 4 or 5 inches of snow when we got up into we went that when we got into the basin. But we weren't going to go very far. We just kind of our plan was to ski a little bit and then cook hot dogs around a bonfire, which we did, and it was fantastic. But it was more of just like going out with friends, and I don't think we were really there to ski hard any means, especially since some of this and I forgot to mention that the skier that did trigger our avalanche was his first time in the back, and that was one thing. So I think that was one of the problems. That was just his first time. We didn't know. We just assumed he has skied on the resort, never in the backcountry. It was just our issues. Weird because everyone, you guys are going downhill, and ours is going up.
Right.
And it wasn't that far up. Not off the basic, that far up. I don't think it was because it was dry. We just thought it was okay. We never even skied. You didn't get to ski.
For, pay for that for mine, yeah, you know, I guess for me personally, like maybe the powder hungry or the dry spell, it wasn't as big of a role. If, one being like, I guess my motivations was, well, one, I'm fortunate I get to ski a lot. So that helps, like that powder hungry thing. For me, I think, well, again, we were going up to take another lap because it was good, but it was also kind of a work driven second lap move because I was really wanting to pay attention to, is this going to be a loose dry problem next day's forecast, or is this going to be no? And out of curiosity, a little different one.
Thank you. And thank you guys. Again, a huge thanks to the Whitefish Convention and Visitors Bureau for helping support these fireside chats and being engaged in our education. So, we will have this recorded. So if you know some other folks who didn't get to tune in, you should be able to find it on our website in a couple days. And again, thanks you all for tuning in and helping out.